What if you discovered that to the world, your life only holds value while it serves a purpose that isn't yours? Nietzsche saw with brutal clarity the invisible machinery of society, where each individual is reduced to a function, useful while productive, disposable when no longer serving. He harbored no comfortable illusions about the human condition. For him, the common man was nothing more than a replaceable part in a larger game, a cog that could be swapped without the whole suffering. This is the wound his philosophy opens in us, realizing that the promise of unconditional worth is merely a lie invented to maintain order. Nietzsche didn't write to console, but to strip bare. The disposable man is one who never dares create his own value, living as a shadow, obedient, waiting for someone to grant him dignity. The question is, are you that shadow, or do you have the courage to become flame? Nietzsche believed modernity had created a great invisible machine, a system that transformed human beings into small gears. Each person was molded to perform a specific function, adapted to collective demands, and quickly replaced should they cease to serve. The logic of utility came to define man's worth. He wasn't valuable in himself, but for what he produced, what he delivered, how well he could conform. This vision may seem harsh, but it's not difficult to see in our daily lives. Think of the worker who dedicates decades of his life to a company and at the first sign of weakness is fired without hesitation. Or the elderly person who, after a lifetime of efforts, is treated as burden, as obsolete body, worthy only of being tolerated. Nietzsche saw this reality not as an accidental flaw of society, but as the essence of the logic governing mass life. Modernity, while promising progress and dignity, merely sophisticated the disposal process. For Nietzsche, the disposable man is one who conforms to this role without resistance, who accepts being defined by external gaze. He doesn't create, doesn't question, doesn't affirm his uniqueness. He merely repeats, merely serves, and when he no longer serves, disappears into anonymity. This is the fate of the majority. This critique gains even more force when we remember society's obsession with roles and functions. From early on, we're pushed toward defined paths: study to get a job, work to sustain a standard, consume to feed the system. We're not taught to ask what we really want, but how we can become useful. Someone's worth is measured by productivity, by the capacity to fit in. What escapes this mold is seen as failure, as deviation, as threat. Nietzsche saw in this the greatest prison of modern life, the domestication of man. Society doesn't just mold bodies, but spirits too. It teaches seeking external approval, desiring recognition, fearing failure. Man transforms into servant of the machine, believing his importance depends on a function that in truth annuls him. He doesn't realize that by reducing himself to a part, he becomes easily replaceable. And here emerges the brutality of Nietzschean thought. Most people will never escape this condition. Most will live as gears, believing themselves irreplaceable when in truth they're disposable. And there's no consolation in this. Nietzsche didn't want to deceive us with sweet hopes. He wanted to shock us with life's nakedness. But this vision, despite being somber, also carries a seed of liberation. For if it's true that man is transformed into a gear, it's also true that he can break this logic. Breaking, however, doesn't mean fleeing society, but affirming an individuality that isn't measured by utility. The first step is realizing that being called disposable isn't condemnation, but inevitable consequence when living according to others' values. Imagine an artist who paints not to sell, but to express his unique vision. In the machine's eyes, he may be useless, since he generates no immediate profit. But for Nietzsche, this is the man who begins liberating himself from the condition of disposable part, because he affirms his own will to creation. He doesn't bow to collective gaze. He doesn't live to be exploited, but to assert himself. In this sense, the man who dares not be useful may be seen as more alive than one who fits perfectly. For the gear that turns in obedience has no self-awareness. It merely fulfills its destiny. But the individual who breaks, even if he fails, experiences the freedom of being. Nietzsche forces us to ask, are we living as parts or daring as creators? The answer is uncomfortable because it requires looking at our own choices. How many times have we abandoned genuine desires just to maintain a position? How many times have we accepted roles that didn't fit us just to be recognized? The disposable man isn't just one the world ignores, but one who ignores himself. One who accepts being replaced because he never dared be irreplaceable. The true tragedy for Nietzsche isn't being discarded by another, but never having affirmed oneself. This is the starting point. Before speaking of morality, resentment, or overcoming, we need to face this wound. We're molded to be parts, and only a few dare break this machinery. Nietzsche believed that the great invention of the weak for survival wasn't physical strength nor practical intelligence, but morality. More precisely, what he called slave morality, born from resentment and inability to act. Faced with a reality where few dominated and many were dominated, fragile man found an artifice, inverting values. What was once a sign of vitality and power became condemned as evil, and what was impotence transformed into virtue. Thus arose the great illusion of importance that sustains disposable men. The weak, incapable of imposing his will, creates a morality where his weakness is transformed into merit. Obedience becomes humility. Inability to act becomes patience. Cowardice disguises itself as goodness. This morality, masked as compassion and justice, allows millions to feel valuable without ever having conquered anything for themselves. It's the way to keep docile those who, in the logic of force, would merely be discarded. Nietzsche saw this implacably. Morality wasn't born from love, but from revenge. It was the revenge of the impotent against the strong. Incapable of attacking directly, the weak invented a system that condemned vigor, audacity, and greatness as if they were sins. Pride became arrogance. The search for pleasure became sin. Self-affirmation became selfishness. Thus, the strong were shamed of their strength, and the weak found terrain where their impotence transformed into reason for pride. This dynamic doesn't belong only to religions, though Nietzsche had Christianity as his main target. It manifests in all forms of mass morality. Think of the worker who, incapable of prospering, consoles himself saying he's better to be poor and honest than rich and corrupt, or the person who never dared live their desires, but repeats that what matters is having a good heart. These phrases sound noble, but for Nietzsche, they're merely justifications created to disguise one's own incapacity to live fully. The disposable man finds in this type of morality a comfortable shelter. He may be useless in society's eyes, may be replaceable like any part, but feels his obedience makes him superior. He believes his weakness is, in truth, a form of spiritual purity. Thus, he remains trapped in the system that consumes him, but without revolt, because he thinks that precisely for being small, he's more dignified. This illusion of importance is perhaps the most powerful mechanism of social control. If the majority accepted that their life is disposable, the system would collapse in despair. But if this same majority believes their smallness is noble, that their impotence is virtue, then they'll continue sustaining the machine without questioning. Nietzsche saw this as a genius trick of weak morality, transforming slavery into choice, submission into virtue, cowardice into sanctity. The problem is that this morality, trying to level everyone downward, kills greatness. The strong, ashamed of their strength, are suffocated by guilt. Creators accused of selfishness stop creating. Life, in its intensity, is reduced to a theater where all must appear modest, equal, harmless. The flame of affirmation is extinguished in the name of docility. Nietzsche provokes us to ask, how many times have we accepted this script in our own lives? How many times have we hidden our ambition for fear of seeming arrogant? How many times have we renounced pleasure because we were told it was sin? How many times have we taken pride in enduring mediocrity, calling it virtue? Weak morality is seductive because it offers easy recognition. One doesn't need to conquer anything grand, just obey the rules of submission. Just be small, but obedient. Just don't bother anyone. That's why it spreads so easily. It feeds the vanity of those who would otherwise have to face their insignificance. But Nietzsche doesn't let us rest in this consolation. He tears us from it. For him, this morality is a prison, a poison that prevents life from flourishing in its strength. True dignity isn't in being accepted by mass morality, but in daring to create one's own values, even if it means being rejected, criticized, or considered evil. It's at this point that his philosophy becomes dangerous, because it demands courage. Courage to admit that perhaps what we were taught as virtue is merely a mask. Courage to perceive that the humility we exalt is, in truth, fear of confronting the world. Courage to perceive that the good heart is often just justification for a life without audacity. And above all, courage to accept that if we don't create our own values, we'll inevitably be disposable. For whoever lives by another's morality never passes beyond shadow, never becomes protagonist of their own existence, is merely an extra in a play someone else wrote. Nietzsche didn't condemn the weak because they were weak, but because they chose to transform their weakness into universal rule, because they didn't accept their limitation as starting point for growth, but as excuse to chain others. This is the deepest poison of weak morality, not just accepting one's own impotence, but forcing the strong to renounce their strength. Thus, the social machine maintains itself. The disposable don't revolt because they believe their submission is noble, and creators suffocated by guilt often stop creating. But it's precisely in this scenario that Nietzsche poses his most urgent question. How long will you accept living under values that aren't yours? Nietzsche believed that resentment was the hidden force that moved most men. For him, it wasn't goodness, nor compassion, nor love of neighbor that kept masses united, but a poisonous, slow, corrosive feeling, resentment. Different from rage, which explodes immediately, resentment is the rancor that accumulates in silence, transforming into poison against life. It's the secret weapon of the impotent against the strong. The disposable man, incapable of imposing his will, finds in resentment a form of psychological survival. He can't win directly, can't create anything greater, can't impose his presence on the world. So he keeps within himself a disguised hatred, a secret desire for revenge. And when he can't directly reach the object of his envy, he invents indirect ways to sabotage, criticize, diminish. Resentment is the weak's revenge against what he'll never have courage to face head-on. Nietzsche describes this mechanism as the basis of slave morality. The weak faced with strength doesn't simply say, "I can't be like him." He says, "He is evil." Resentment inverts values. The other's vitality is called arrogance. His courage is accused of cruelty. His pleasure is condemned as sin. And thus, little by little, the resentful transforms his impotence into supposed moral superiority. He isn't weak because he can't act, but because he chose to be good. This is the lie that sustains his self-esteem. We can see resentment in banal situations of daily life. See the co-worker who never dared seek more, but fiercely criticizes the one who gets promoted, insinuating he only succeeded through flattery. See the neighbor who, incapable of living her own desires, spends days commenting on others' lives, calling immoral what, deep down, she envies. See, even in ourselves, when we feel strange satisfaction in seeing someone fail, as if the other's fall justified our mediocrity. Resentment is comfortable because it allows us to blame the world for our own incapacity. It creates an imaginary enemy, the powerful, the rich, the audacious, the different. And by hating them, the resentful feels his life has meaning. He's no longer just disposable, he's someone who, in his smallness, can silently sabotage greatness. Resentment gives the weak a sensation of power, even if that power is merely poison. Nietzsche saw resentment as the great motor of humanity's moral history. He believed it was through this that values were inverted. Morality of strength based on life was replaced by morality of weakness, based on negation. Men didn't seek greatness, but united to condemn others' greatness. Resentment organized the mass around envy and veiled hatred. But there's something even more disturbing in this analysis. Resentment isn't content to live hidden. It needs to transform its weakness into law. The resentful doesn't just envy in silence, he wants everyone to renounce what he can't have. If he can't enjoy pleasure, he condemns pleasure as sin. If he can't conquer, he exalts humility as virtue. If he can't shine, he demands that all extinguish themselves. Thus, he creates a world leveled downward where no one dares be different, because being different is being guilty. This logic traps us in a suffocating cycle. The disposable man, moved by resentment, doesn't seek to liberate himself. He doesn't transform his impotence into creative impulse. On the contrary, he transforms it into collective prison. He pulls others down, sabotages greatness, condemns what is vital, and thus ensures that no one escapes the mediocrity he himself couldn't overcome. Nietzsche invites us to recognize this resentment within us, not just in others, but in us. He asks us, how many times have we applauded someone's fall just to feel better? How many times have we condemned what deep down we secretly desired? How many times have we invented moral excuses to hide envy? Resentment, contrary to what we think, isn't exception, it's rule. It's the natural breathing of the mass. But what to do facing this? Nietzsche doesn't offer easy consolation. He doesn't believe it's possible to completely eliminate resentment. He challenges us to overcome it through creation. The antidote to resentment isn't resignation, but audacity to affirm one's own will. When we create, when we invent, when we affirm ourselves, resentment loses force because we no longer need to live from negating the other. The man who creates doesn't envy, he overflows. Therefore, Nietzsche believed only a few would escape the condition of disposables. They wouldn't be those who sought compassion or acceptance, but those who dared create their own path. They wouldn't need to destroy others' resentment, just not let themselves be governed by it. For life doesn't flourish in negation, but in affirmation. Resentment is the motor of the mass, but doesn't need to be the motor of the individual. The man who perceives this trap can, even in solitude, choose another path. He can refuse to live from envy and dare to live from creation, can refuse to level everything downward and affirm his difference, can choose to no longer be disposable, but someone who marks the world with his own flame. This is the question Nietzsche hurls like a knife. Do you have courage to recognize resentment within yourself and overcome it through creation? Or will you continue living as shadow, feeding on others' falls? Nietzsche didn't believe in equality. For him, life doesn't sustain itself on principles of universal justice, but on invisible hierarchies that reveal the difference between those who create and those who merely obey. The world, in its brutality, divides between common man, trapped in resentment and morality of submission, and superior man, one who dares create his own values, even if he must face alone the world's weight. Superior man isn't necessarily more intelligent or physically stronger. He doesn't need titles, diplomas, or social recognition. His difference lies in something more radical, courage to affirm his own will without asking permission. He doesn't live to be useful to others, nor to adapt to collective gaze. He lives to expand his potency, to transform chaos into creation. Nietzsche called him Übermensch, the overman, not as mystical or unreachable figure, but as concrete possibility for those who refuse to live as disposable gears. Creating value means breaking with inherited values. While common man takes pride in repeating received morality, morality of obedience, humility, resignation, superior man questions it. He looks at imposed rules and asks, why is this considered good? Why should I obey this law? Who benefits when I bow? This attitude deconstructs the illusion that values are eternal or sacred. For Nietzsche, all values are human creations and therefore can be destroyed and recreated. But this act requires courage. Most prefer the security of obeying. Creating value is a solitary gesture, for the creator won't find immediate applause. On the contrary, he'll be accused of arrogance, madness, heresy. He'll face mass condemnation because his simple existence threatens the order of weak morality. Superior man bothers not through his words, but through his life. He's a living body, proving it's possible to live differently. And this is unbearable for those content with repeating. Nietzsche invites us to think of this superior man not as distant hero, but as possibility throbbing within each one. In us exists the tendency toward obedience, resentment, weak morality, but also the spark of creation. The question is, which will we feed? How many times do we suffocate our own potency just to be accepted? How many times do we stop creating for fear of judgment? Superior man is one who allows himself to fail in his audacity, but doesn't accept the comfort of mediocrity. He prefers to fall trying to affirm his vision than to live eternally in the shadow of approval. This makes him dangerous because he's unpredictable. He doesn't bow to utility's logic, doesn't let himself be discarded. While others strive to remain useful, he creates worlds that didn't exist before. We can see this figure in artists who dare break traditions, in thinkers who question certainties, in anonymous people who, even without fame, live according to their inner truth. What makes them superior isn't external recognition, but fidelity to their own creation. They don't ask the world to give them value, they become value. Nietzsche believed life only reaches its fullness when lived this way. Obedience and resentment lead to stagnation. Creation, however painful, conducts to existence's affirmation. Superior man is one who embraces life's tragedy, suffering, loss, chaos, and instead of lamenting, transforms all this into strength. He doesn't deny suffering, he uses it as fuel. This is the essence of Nietzsche's tragic thought. Not fleeing pain, but dancing with it. But care is needed not to confuse superior man with tyrant or vulgar egoist. The tyrant needs the other to dominate. Superior man, on the contrary, doesn't need to submit anyone. He suffices himself. His greatness doesn't depend on enslaving, but on creating. The vulgar egoist seeks only to satisfy immediate desires. Superior man transcends this, creating values that resonate beyond himself, even if the world rejects him. This vision is liberating, and at the same time, terrifying. Liberating because it shows we're not condemned to live as disposables. Terrifying because it reveals there are no guarantees. Creating value means walking without map, without external authority, saying what's right. It's carrying the weight of being author of one's own law. For many, this is unbearable. It's easier to live as gear than assume responsibility of being creator. Nietzsche, however, doesn't hesitate. Only who dares create can really say they live. The rest merely exist, as shadow, as replaceable part. Superior man doesn't seek consolation, doesn't wait for celestial rewards, doesn't dream of universal recognition. He satisfies himself, affirming his will before the abyss. And in this gesture, proves he's not disposable. Nietzschean provocation is direct. Do you content yourself repeating inherited values or dare create your own? Do you prefer the security of mass morality or creator's solitude? This question isn't just philosophical, it's practical. It manifests in each choice, in each renunciation, in each silence. For every time we silence ourselves to be accepted, we kill the possibility of superior man living within us. The path is dangerous, but perhaps it's the only one really worth it. For as Nietzsche reminds us, living without creating is merely surviving. And surviving deep down is already being dead. Nietzsche never tired of repeating that a man's value isn't in his utility to society, but in his capacity to affirm his own existence. This is one of the most radical and, at the same time, most uncomfortable ideas of his philosophy, having courage to be considered useless. For in the social machine's eyes, everything that doesn't serve a collective purpose is disposable. And yet, it's precisely in this position of uselessness that true greatness can be born. The world measures man by what he produces, by the position he occupies, by the money he accumulates, by the function he performs. It's market logic applied to life itself. Who doesn't serve isn't worth. But Nietzsche invites us to question this measure. What happens to one who refuses to be defined by utility? What happens to one who doesn't bow to productivity obsession and dares live for a meaning that can't be calculated? The answer is simple and brutal. He'll be seen as useless. He'll be called failure, lazy, alienated, eccentric. The mass can't bear one who doesn't participate in utility's game because his existence denounces the majority's disguised slavery. The man who doesn't seek approval threatens the entire system's logic. He doesn't let himself be trapped by labels, and this makes him dangerous. Nietzsche saw in this not failure, but proof of courage. Rare strength is needed to bear collective contempt, to keep walking even when everyone points fingers saying, "This one serves nothing." The creator, thinker, artist, visionary all carry this mark of uselessness in mass eyes. But it's precisely this uselessness that makes them free to create something that can't be measured by spreadsheets or statistics. We can see this clearly in the artist's figure, who refuses to adapt his work to popular taste. While market demands quick and easy entertainment, he persists in his vision, even if rejected. In the world's eyes, he seems useless, but his work, with time, can transform consciousness, open horizons, change destinies. Same applies to the thinker who refuses dogmas, to the visionary who challenges conventions. His immediate uselessness is the price of greatness that can't be understood in the present. Nietzsche provokes us to think about our own lives. How many times have we sacrificed our most intimate desires just to seem useful? How many times have we silenced bold ideas because they might sound strange or impractical? How many times have we given up something authentic in the name of collective approval? This is the tragedy. By seeking to be useful, we often become disposable. For whoever lives only to serve external logic loses their uniqueness. The courage to be useless doesn't mean living in passivity or indifference. On the contrary, it means living creatively, without expecting the world to validate this creation. It means breaking with the obsession to please, to fit in, to be recognized. It's accepting that, in society's eyes, you may never be important, but still affirming your life as unique and unrepeatable. Nietzsche knew this choice has a high price. The man who dares be useless may face solitude, incomprehension, even contempt from those around him. But he also knew this solitude is fertile. It's in it that the possibility of creating new values is born. of finding a voice that doesn't echo from the mass, but from life's own depth. This is one of the greatest differences between disposable man and superior man. The disposable measures his existence by another's gaze. He needs to be recognized, applauded, validated. He only feels alive when his utility is confirmed. Superior man doesn't need this confirmation. He suffices himself. His courage lies in affirming, "I may be useless to you, but not to me." Nietzsche alerts us that living only for utility is living chained. For when utility ends, the person dissolves. The worker who only defines himself by employment, when fired, feels he ceased to exist. The father who only recognizes himself in the provider function, when losing this function, plunges into emptiness. The elderly who's no longer productive in a society obsessed with youth is treated as burden. All are victims of the same cruel logic. While they serve, they're tolerated. When they stop serving, they become invisible. The man who dares be useless breaks this logic. He doesn't depend on external functions to affirm his value. He knows his life doesn't need justifications. He isn't a gear piece, he's living flame. And even if the world rejects him, his existence is proof that there's something greater than utility, creating meaning. This courage is rare because it requires deep detachment. One must give up the comfort of being accepted. One must bear the solitude of walking against the tide. One must face the anguish of having no guarantees. But for Nietzsche, this is the price of true freedom. For who doesn't dare be useless, dares what? Only serve until discarded. Deep down, Nietzsche asks us, do you prefer to be useful and disposable, or useless and unforgettable? This is the choice that separates those who live as shadows from those who become creators. For Nietzsche, true victory isn't in escaping pain, nor in conquering mass approval, but in affirming life in all its brutality. Life, with its tragedies, losses and uncertainties, doesn't apologize. It doesn't offer guarantees of meaning, doesn't promise eternal rewards. It simply is, and the man who dares embrace this reality without illusions is one who kills within himself the disposable man. Disposable man lives from negation. He hides behind inherited morality, waits for others to tell him how to live, desperately seeks to be useful, to not face emptiness. He feeds on resentment, envy, comparison. His life is a constant attempt to cling to values he didn't create. Therefore, he's easily replaceable, because he's nothing more than reflection of what surrounds him. But Nietzsche shows us there's another path. Life can be affirmed as creative force, as dance before the abyss. The man who refuses to live only for utility, who overcomes resentment, who creates his own values, this one is no longer disposable. He may even be rejected by society, may even be called mad or useless, but his existence carries a weight that can't be erased. He made himself author of himself. This is the great rupture. Stop living as replaceable part to live as unrepeatable creator. It's as if Nietzsche told us you're only disposable while accepting your life depends on others' values. The moment you create your own, you cease being able to be replaced. Life affirmation means saying yes even to suffering. Nietzsche saw in suffering not an obstacle, but a condition for greatness. Who seeks only comfort and security remains small, trapped in utility's logic. But one who bears pain, who faces solitude, who accepts tragedy, can transform all this into potency. It's from pain that the creator forges new values. The concept of eternal return is proof of this radical affirmation. Nietzsche proposes the question, if you had to live this same life exactly equal infinite times, would you accept it? Disposable man. Hearing this, despairs, for his life is so repetitive and meaningless it would be torment to repeat it. But the man who affirms life, even amid pains, would say yes with courage. He would accept reliving each instant because his life isn't submission, but creation. This is the journey's final point. Disposable man's death doesn't happen when he's rejected by society, but when he himself decides not to live as shadow anymore. The disposable dies when the Creator is born. And this birth isn't a grandiose act, but a daily gesture, daring to be faithful to one's own will, even when no one applauds. The Creator doesn't need to be celebrated, he needs to be authentic. Nietzsche knew few would choose this path. Most will continue preferring mass security, resentment morality, illusion of importance. Most will continue living as gear, useful until replaced. But this doesn't diminish the urgency of his provocation. On the contrary, it makes it even more necessary. For even if only a few awaken, it will be enough to keep creation's flame alive. In the end, Nietzsche's message isn't despair, but brutal freedom. Yes, the world treats us as disposable. Yes, society measures our value by utility. Yes, inherited morality keeps us small, but none of this is definitive. Man can break, man can create, man can affirm, and in that instant, he stops being part and becomes flame. Life, for Nietzsche, doesn't ask for justifications, it asks for courage. Courage to live without guarantees, courage to dance over the abyss, courage to be useless in the world's eyes, but indispensable to oneself. This courage is what kills disposable man and gives birth to the man who affirms. The question then is inevitable. When your life's end arrives, will you have lived as disposable part or as value creator? Will you have been shadow or flame? Will you have passed unnoticed, useful only while serving, or will you have left marks that can't be erased? Nietzsche doesn't offer ready answers. He merely hands us the mirror and forces us to face the reflection. The rest is choice, and every choice is creation. We've reached the end of this journey through Nietzsche's brutal vision of disposable man. We've seen how society transforms lives into gears, how weak morality creates illusions of dignity, how resentment silently corrodes, and how only the courage to create one's own values can liberate us from the condition of replaceable parts. The great lesson is simple and implacable. You don't need to accept being disposable. But for this, you'll have to pay the price of solitude, audacity, incomprehension. The question is, are you willing? And I leave one final provocation. What belief about your own value has most imprisoned you until today? If this reflection touched you, leave your comment saying where you're watching from, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow with us in this deep thinking community. Nietzsche didn't write to comfort, but to awaken. And that's what we seek here, to awaken.